God of incarnation, we ask that you once again take the Word and transform it into a living and breathing reality we can all together experience. Be present here in this space and in these words, God. For if you are present here, then nothing else will matter. But if you are not present here, then nothing else will matter. In the name of the Creator, the Christ, and the Comforter. Amen. Some of our best theological reflection and thought comes from jail cells. It was in 3 prisons and over 27 years that Nelson Mandela developed an idea that became the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which has saved South Africa. It was in jail where Gandhi said, "I always get my best bargains and ideas behind prison bars." It was in a jail cell in Birmingham where Martin Luther King wrote a letter that developed his theology of nonviolent resistance to racism. And it was in a jail where Paul wrote some of his most stunning pastoral letters. So if it gets to Saturday night and the sermon hasn't come to me yet, I know where I'm headed. Because it seems that God's voice speaks loudest and clearest to those behind bars, which might honestly tell us something about a group of people behind bars today whose voices and whose stories are not heard enough in our world or in our churches. Paul begins this letter in a different way than most of his other letters. Most letters he begins with Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, but this letter he begins with Paul, a prisoner because of Jesus Christ, and he literally means that. Paul is underground, in chains, and in prison for his words and his faith. Paul is writing this particular letter from the jail at Ephesus, where he is in chains. It's a place that I have been, and it's not prison like we think of prison today. It's more like a cave that is underground, and you can't stand up. It's too tiny for a person to stand, and it's dark. It's claustrophobic, and it's completely disorienting. And that's where he is, pondering his future, and if his future will end in freedom or execution. It's here he writes this particular letter, which is a common practice for those in jail, largely because of the guards and the soldiers who are watching over those in jail. If you could reach out to somebody who was well connected, you might be able to get a bribe or a favor for the guards and soldiers, and you might be able to get your way out of jail. And it's clear from several of Paul's other letters that he is very well connected. However, this letter has nothing to do with getting Paul out of prison, but instead has everything to do with someone Paul has met while in prison, Onesimus, who is a runaway slave. Paul refers to him as my son. And Paul is writing a letter not to ask his friend Philemon, who is wealthy and powerful. He's not writing a letter to ask him to free Paul, but instead he is writing him a letter to say, in all your wealth and in all your power, will you free your own slave? Actually, he's even going further than that. He is saying, in all your wealth and power, will you free your own slave and welcome him back into your household as a sibling in Jesus Christ? Make sure you notice that. Paul does not advocate for reconciliation between the slave and slave master, which would have already been going out on a limb. Instead, Paul advocates for a whole new way of doing life. As a Christ follower, he advocates that the slave be freed, and that the former slave and the former slave owner be siblings in Jesus Christ. It's the lion and the lamb lying down together. It's a bold and big ask. And here's the catch. It's not one that Paul had to make. This week, I've been dealing with all sorts of paperwork to try to close on our house. And this has involved having to get new insurance for our house, and that involves new car insurance. And I have this insurance agent. She's wonderful, but she has sent me what seems like hundreds of spreadsheets with different offers from insurance companies and which one covers which, and they're all like a half percentage differently. And I've been looking at them, and my job is to look at all these differences and then to pick the insurance that is best for us. Which is a problem because in all of my various degrees, insurance premiums have never come up. That's not a seminary class. So in looking over all the offers until they looked blurry to me, I finally emailed her back late one night with this: just tell me this. How do I get the best offer and the best coverage for the very least dollars? Because that's the insurance that I want you to sign me up for. I want the best value for the least resources, more bang for my buck, maximum rewards for minimum efforts, which is the way most of us live. That's how most of us think. It's certainly how we shop. We walk into a store and let's say we're looking for towels. We find the towel aisle, and then we find the color that we want, and then we find the size that we want, and we find the comfort level we want, and there's probably still 4 or 5 options for us to choose from, so then we start thinking in terms of value. Which of these towels gives me what I want for the lowest price? That's how we exercise. Which workout takes the least amount of time but it's going to make me look the best in the end? It's how we eat. What tastes the best but has the least calories? It's how we drive. Which road's going to get me there the fastest and has the least traffic? It's how we do our life. The best value for the least resources. And I think that's how we've been doing faith as well. What's going to get me the best spiritual life, but is going to cost me the very least? And maybe that question, and maybe that approach to spirituality is the reason that our world is in the shape that it is today. Maybe that's why there is so much fear and hate everywhere we look. Maybe that's why so many of our Muslim siblings are scared for their very lives. It's why bullying has become the new normal. It's why there are hundreds of individuals sleeping on the streets around this very church. Because for decades and decades, we have been trying to get the best spiritual life, but the one that will cost us the very least, although it has cost our world a great deal. And maybe that question, that approach to spirituality, is why our souls are in the shape they're in today. It's why we have all these issues that we have stuffed so far down into our souls that we don't even notice how they affect everything we do. It's why as a people, we are so scared all the time. It's why we have no healthy understanding of who we truly are. It's why we've never properly dealt with our addictions and our anxieties and our demons. Because for decades, we've been trying to get the best spiritual life, but the one that'll cost us the very least. I don't have to deal with all that stuff inside my soul. And again, that savings has come with a heavy price. The best value for the least resources is not the equation of Christianity. And obviously, Paul understood and knew this. Look at his situation. Paul could be killed any day now, and he has connections to somebody on the outside, a wealthy friend who could help him. However, Paul also meets this slave who belongs to the wealthy friend, and Paul knows that anytime someone's being dominated, there's a problem, because any system of domination goes against the kingdom of God. Paul has 2 options. Paul can stay silent. Paul could reach out to Philemon for his own personal advantage. Free me. Send resources to get me out of jail. Or he could stand with the slave and fight for the slave's freedom, which meant that Paul was going to have to bring up the issue of slavery. And as a people, we've never been able to talk about slavery in a healthy or meaningful way. And that meant that Paul was going to advocate for removing privilege and suffering economic loss. And that doesn't win you friends. He's going to get involved in a situation, and then he's going to cry out for an outcome that goes totally against Roman law. He didn't want the slave to be punished or killed. He wants the slave to be freed and welcomed back in the household. He's going to get involved in a situation that he doesn't have to get involved in. And don't forget, in this story, the person who will likely become the most angry at Paul is also the one who could most likely free Paul. This is not the best value for the least resources. It's maybe just the opposite, putting the most on the line while gaining the very least for yourself. Who operates like that today? Paul could have avoided the issue, refused to get involved with the runaway slave, and instead focus on his own freedom. Today, Paul could have driven right on by the I-35 underpass and pretended not to see all the individuals sleeping outside. He could have ignored the fact that our city has better humane societies than homeless shelters. Paul could turn a blind eye to all his Muslim neighbors who are truly scared for their life. Paul could avoid the truths that are deeply buried in his heart, ignoring his own addictions and anxieties. Paul could refuse to face his own fears. Paul could choose the path of least resistance. Just tell me, how do I get the best deal by doing the very least? Remain silent about the issue. Refuse to deal with it. Secure my own freedom. But no. Paul instead chose to risk everything for someone else. It's the benediction of our Browning Ware. May you be blessed with the foolishness to think that you can make a difference in the world, that you will do things for others which others tell you cannot be done. And what I've struggled with this week is that I don't know for Paul if this was even a choice. I don't know that if he really thought through my freedom or another's freedom. It just seems that it's in Paul's very nature to know that he risked everything for someone else. He does that because Paul is a follower of Jesus Christ. And followers of Jesus Christ take huge risk for one another. That's what being a Christian is really about. Paul gets involved with this issue because his entire identity, his entire life are formed around a man who surrendered his very life to save the world. Paul's mind was so set on Jesus Christ that he knew what he had to do because he had his eyes on Christ, who in another letter that Paul wrote from that same prison, he described Christ as one who did not regard equality with God as a thing to be grasped, but instead emptied himself and became obedient to the point of death. And Paul knows that Christ so well that Paul has that same vision. Last summer, Blake and I were at the swimming pool, and we'd spent most of the afternoon at the pool. We got out and we ate dinner, and Blake wanted to swim a little bit longer. So I said she could, and I sat beside her. She was swimming. I had my feet dangling in the water, and she swam up to me. And she said, "Dad, come, swim with me. Get in the water." I was tired. I've been swimming all afternoon, so I looked at her and I said, "Babe, I'm in the water. Look at my feet. They're in, like I'm kind of here." And she looked up at me with those big brown eyes that melt my heart. And she looked confused, and she said to me, "Dad, it doesn't count unless you're all the way in." Maybe those are the words we need this morning to guide us. Maybe it's time that we put away our thinking, just tell me how I get the very most by doing the very least, and instead we're guided by that principle. It doesn't count unless you're all the way in. Because to me this morning, that sounds like gospel. So what does that look like for us? That's the challenge that I gave the missions committee this week. I asked them, with all the things that we do, if we claim to be a people's cathedral in the heart of the city, then how are we a cathedral for the city? A cathedral to the city? What does it look like for First Baptist Church of Austin to go all the way in for Austin? Here's what it looks like for me. We realize that it doesn't count until we take huge risk for other people. That it doesn't count until we deal with all the things that we've put off dealing with. It doesn't count until everyone belongs. It doesn't count until we pay attention and deal with any and every form of injustice we see in our city. It doesn't count until we're all the way in the midst of the sorrows and the injustice, in the midst of the pain of being human, because that place is where love was born. And that place is where love conquered all. Maybe that is what this invitation to the communion table is all about. An invitation to go all the way in. Because that night, when Jesus stood at the table, Jesus didn't say, and this is a part of my body, and this is a part of my blood. No. Jesus said, this is all my body, and this is all my blood. I'm all the way in this thing, and those who follow me will do the exact same thing. Will you join me this morning at the table?